Tonight, the timeline seemingly blows up. This as Nolan's mother is investigated. Why? We want the truth about what happened to Nolan Wells.
I don't think they've cooperated at all. They do not have Nolan's phone. They haven't had access to Nolan's phone. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department hasn't. So how can you say that there's text missing or there's photographs missing? Our boys had no reason to do anything with Nolan's phone other than give it back to Christine and her friends later that night. So anything about missing text messages or Snapchats is completely false.
Right? But this is the first time where she truly defended herself and defended her family. And this was long due.
I'm in the kitchen. My phone rings. Now, this is probably like early 11 o'clock, somewhere around there. Phone rings when I make it back to the phone, and I'm like, whose number is this? Because, you know, we get weird phone calls sometimes. They didn't leave a message. The number pops back up. I pick up the phone because it says maybe Warren. And I'm like, Warren? So this is 11:07. That's per my cell phone records. So I answered the phone. He's like, hey, Miss Christine, have you seen or talked to Nolan? I said, no. Why? He should be with you guys. And he said, oh, no, well, you know, when we went to the island, there was a girl named Katie that he met, and he had decided to stay behind. And I said, what? Because we know our child.
Christine Wonsley is sitting with her son's phone in her hands, and something isn't matching up. She's not a detective. She's not a lawyer. She's a mother, going through the last digital footprint her 18-year-old son left behind, trying to understand a story that everyone around her keeps telling the same way. Nolan went out on a boat with friends for the 4th of July. He decided to stay behind on the island. The boat came back without him. That's the story. That's what she's been told, more or less, by almost everyone who was there. But the phone in her hands isn't telling her that story. And once she starts pulling that thread, it doesn't stop unraveling. Here's the question she keeps coming back to, the one that's now sitting underneath a federal request, a private autopsy, an audio review, and a grand jury that could be seated within the month. If everything happened exactly the way it's been described, why doesn't the evidence line up with the story? Not one piece of it. Not the phone, not the photos, not the boat, not the body. There are 5 gaps in this story, and Nolan's mom found every single one. Quick note before we go further. This case is still under active investigation. Nobody has been charged with anything. What you're about to hear comes from public reporting, court filings, and the family's own statements, and none of it is a claim that any specific person is guilty of anything. Now, let's get into it. You already know the broad strokes of this case, so we're not going to spend 20 minutes re-walking you through July 4th. You know Nolan traveled out to Horn Island with a group of friends for the holiday. You know his body was found 2 days later, on the northwestern tip of that island, by a National Park Service ranger. You know his family hired civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and you've probably seen at least one of the press conferences by now. The ones where Christine stands next to Elmore, her husband, and says, in some version or another, that all she wants is the truth. What you may not have sat with is how each individual piece of this case, on its own, might not mean much. A phone in the wrong place, a missing Snapchat, a boat that took on water, an autopsy that couldn't finish, a timeline with a hole in it. Any one of those, by itself, is the kind of thing that happens on any given day, to any given family, for reasons that are completely innocent. It's the number that should give you pause. Not one gap. 5. 5 separate, independently documented places where the account doesn't match the evidence, found not by online sleuths chasing a viral theory, but by the people closest to this case. Nolan's own mother, a licensed forensic pathologist, forensic audio engineers, and ocean engineering experts working alongside the family's legal team. We're going straight into the 5 things that don't add up. Starting with the very first thing that made Christine Wonsley stop trusting the story she was being told. Number 1. The phone that wasn't with him. The account from Nolan's friends has always been simple. Nolan left his phone behind on the boat. That's it. No big mystery, no dramatic detail. Just a phone, left on a boat. The kind of thing that happens to anyone on a group trip when the day gets chaotic. Except that's not where the phone actually was. Christine and her husband, Elmore, didn't just wait around for someone to hand them Nolan's phone. They tracked it, using Life 360, the same location-sharing app millions of families use to keep tabs on each other. They watched where that phone actually went after Nolan went missing, and it wasn't sitting untouched on a boat somewhere off Horn Island. It was back on the mainland, at a friend's residence. Think about that for a second. If the story is that Nolan simply left his phone behind, and the boat came back to shore with everyone else's belongings, then fine. The phone comes back to shore too, exactly like the story says. That part checks out. But the phone didn't just come back with the boat and sit there waiting to be returned. It ended up at a specific location, a friend's house, and it took a family friend physically going there to retrieve it. That's the detail that started pulling at Christine. Not because a phone being left behind is suspicious on its own. Teenagers leave phones places constantly, but because of what happened to it afterward, and how long it took, and who ended up holding on to it. It's the kind of detail that, on its own, might mean nothing. It's also the kind of detail that, when you're the mother of a missing 18-year-old, becomes the very first thing that makes you start asking questions instead of just accepting answers. This is the detail that, by multiple accounts, effectively launched everything that followed: the independent investigation, the legal team, the public pressure campaign. Not a dramatic piece of evidence, just a location that didn't match the explanation. Think about how differently this story reads depending on which version you believe. In one version, a phone gets left behind in the chaos of a boat trip, ends up back at the dock with everyone else's stuff, and someone eventually hands it back. Ordinary, forgettable. In the other version, the phone travels, on its own, separate from Nolan, separate from the boat's actual return, to a specific address, and it takes a deliberate trip by a family friend to go retrieve it from there. That's not the same story anymore. That's a phone with its own timeline, its own path. One that doesn't automatically connect back to, he simply left it behind. Christine has never said this proves anything on its own. What she's said, in essence, is that it was the first thread, the first piece of the official account that, once she checked it herself instead of just accepting it, didn't hold together the way she'd been told it would. And the phone's location wasn't the only thing that didn't add up. Number 2, the missing Snapchat activity. Here's what makes the next gap sting a little more, once you know it. Nolan documented things. That's not speculation. That's what his own mother has said publicly, more than once. He was the kind of kid who took the video, who posted the photo, who snapped his friends doing whatever they were doing that day. Because that's just what teenagers do now, especially on a holiday, especially on a boat, especially on an island most of them had never been to. So when Christine went through his phone, she expected to find exactly that. A day's worth of moments. Instead, she found almost nothing. No photos, no videos, no Snapchat activity. Not from Nolan's account, and not from his second Snapchat account either, because like a lot of teenagers, he kept more than one. Nothing. From the entire day he disappeared. Now, here's why the timing matters, and it's worth sitting with this for a second. Snapchat content, the way most people use the app, typically doesn't stick around forever. It's built to disappear, usually within about 24 hours, unless someone actively saves it. And the family wasn't checking this phone a week later, or even a few days later. They were going through it well within that 24-hour window. Which means whatever was or wasn't there should have still been there. If Nolan had done what he always did, pulled out his phone at some point during a full day on a boat, on an island, with a group of friends on a holiday, there should have been something. Anything. A single photo, a 10-second clip, a snap sent to one friend. There was nothing. We're not going to tell you what that means. We don't know what it means, and neither does anyone else publicly at this point. That's exactly the problem. What we can tell you is that this is a detail Christine Wells Wonsley raised publicly, one that's been reported across multiple major outlets, and one that the family has said they compared against other location and account data to try to make sense of. It's a hole, an absence where there should have been presence. There's a version of this where the explanation is completely mundane. Phones die. Apps glitch. Not every hangout gets snapped, no matter how consistent someone usually is. People forget to check their memories tab, storage runs out, an update fails silently in the background. All of that is true, and all of that is possible. But Christine isn't a stranger evaluating a pattern from the outside. She's a mother who watched her son's habits for 18 years, and she's telling anyone who'll listen that this wasn't him. Combine that with an account already showing signs of something unusual, a phone that traveled somewhere it shouldn't have, and a blank digital record on the one day that would end up mattering most, starts to look less like coincidence and more like a second gap sitting right next to the first one. That's gap 2. But gap 3 is where things start getting harder to explain. Because gap 3 isn't about what's missing. It's about what exists, and who's allowed to hear it. Number 3. The audio nobody's fully heard yet. Let's be precise here, because this is the part of the story that's gotten muddied the most online, and we want to get it exactly right. The friends' account of that afternoon is that they had to leave Horn Island early because their boat started taking on water. Somebody called for help. Nolan, according to that account, said he wanted to stay behind and catch a ride back with someone else later. That's the explanation for why the boat left without him. And here's the thing. There is a real recording of that call. It went to a private towing company called Sea Tow, and it was released by Mississippi State Marine officials. If you've spent any time near this case online, you've probably already heard some version of it, or read a transcript. A panicked voice telling the dispatcher their bilge pump had stopped working, that they were sinking, asking for help. The dispatcher asking how bad it was. The boat ultimately not needing a tow after all. So no, the call itself isn't some hidden secret. It's public. People have picked it apart. Outlets have published it. And at least one retired FBI agent who reviewed it on camera said flatly that he didn't see anything nefarious in it. That's a fair, honest part of this story, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. Here's where the actual gap is. A separate version of that same recording, one that circulated through a celebrity news outlet, turned out to run about 20 seconds longer than the official version released by the state, with a different digital signature entirely. 20 seconds. Not nothing, not everything, but enough that a forensic audio expert publicly raised questions about where that extra footage came from and whether it had been altered. And separately from that, the family's own legal team has hired independent audio engineers to go through the full, original recording, not the edited clips going around online, the complete thing, to understand exactly what was said, by whom, and in what order, during those minutes when the story says everything changed. That review is still happening. Nobody outside that process has said publicly what it shows. We're not going to guess, and you shouldn't either. That's exactly the kind of thing that turns into a rumor within a day and a lawsuit within a month. What we can tell you is that there's a real, documented discrepancy between two versions of the same recording, and a family that didn't feel like the official explanation closed the book on what actually happened on that boat. It's worth pointing out how unusual it is for a family to take this step at all. Hiring forensic audio engineers isn't a cheap or casual decision. It's the kind of move reserved for cases where the stakes are high enough and the trust in the official account is low enough that a family decides they need their own independent read on a piece of evidence everyone else has already moved past. That alone tells you something about where Christine and her legal team believe the real answers might still be sitting. Not in a document, not in a press release, but buried inside a recording most of the public thinks they've already heard in full. 3 gaps in. 2 more to go, and these last 2 involve Nolan's body itself. Number 4, the autopsy that couldn't finish. Nothing criminal happened on that island. That's the account. That's what's been said, publicly, by the people who were there. No fight, no altercation involving Nolan, nothing beyond a group of teenagers on a holiday that went terribly, tragically wrong when one of them didn't come home. The independent autopsy doesn't resolve that one way or the other, and that, itself, is the gap. The family didn't just accept the state's findings. They brought in their own forensic pathologist, Dr. Roger Mitchell, a board-certified pathologist who's also the president of the National Medical Association and the former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C. Somebody with real, serious credentials, doing a second, independent look at Nolan's body about a week after he was found. And he ran into a wall almost immediately. When Nolan's remains were turned over for the independent exam, the anterior neck structures, the tissue in the throat, weren't included. They'd been retained by the state medical examiner's office during the original autopsy. Now, to be fair to everyone involved here, Multiple forensic experts, including ones with no connection to this case, have said that retaining certain structures for further testing is a normal part of how autopsies work. It's not automatically evidence of anything hidden. That's a real, documented, standard practice, and it would be dishonest to tell you otherwise. But here's what it meant in practice. Without that tissue, Dr. Mitchell couldn't rule out an injury to the neck as a contributing factor in Nolan's death. He couldn't determine whether Nolan was conscious when he entered the water. He couldn't determine exactly how he ended up in the water in the first place. On top of that, he noted something specific, a focal area of red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head, in the occipital region. He didn't find fractures. He didn't find deep tissue injuries. But between the decomposition, the missing tissue, and the unanswered questions about how Nolan entered the water at all, his written conclusion was as direct as a forensic report gets. He could not rule out whether some non-accidental factor contributed to or caused Nolan's death. Cause and manner of death, undetermined, pending further investigation. That's not a finding of foul play. It's also not a finding that clears anyone. It's a professional, credentialed pathologist saying, in writing, that he does not have enough information to tell you what happened, and that some of what he needed simply wasn't available to him the first time around. So here's the gap, laid out plainly. Why weren't those structures there for the first independent look? Standard practice explains part of it, it doesn't explain all of it, and it's part of why Dr. Mitchell has continued reviewing additional material from the state's original examination since then, trying to close the door that his first report left wide open. There's also something worth sitting with in what the report explicitly did not find. No fractures, no lacerations, no obvious deep tissue trauma anywhere else on Nolan's body. If you're looking for a smoking gun in this report, there isn't one, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But the absence of obvious trauma doesn't automatically mean the absence of foul play, not according to Dr. Mitchell's own written conclusion, and not according to independent pathologists who've reviewed his findings since. Decomposition, he noted, can hide bruising that would otherwise be visible on a fresher body. Add that to the missing throat tissue, and what you're left with isn't a clean finding of an accident. It's a professional saying, on the record, that too many of his questions still don't have answers. 5 gaps, 2 more to go, and the next one might be the hardest to explain of all, because it's not about a piece of evidence. It's about time itself. Number 5. The timeline nobody can fully account for. The friend's account of the final hours is straightforward. They last saw Nolan alive on the island. He made the choice to stay. They got in the boat and they left. But when investigators, and separately, the family's own legal team, tried to build a full second-by-second picture of that day, using photos, videos, GPS data, and every witness account they could gather, they hit something that's since been described, in reporting from the Washington Informer, as a material gap in the timeline. Not a small inconsistency. A real, acknowledged hole between the last independently confirmed sighting of Nolan and the moment his friend's boat actually left the island. That's not speculation from a message board. That's language used to describe the findings of an actual analytical review of the available evidence. And it doesn't stop at the timeline on land. Attorney Ben Crump's team has brought in ocean engineering experts to look at something else entirely, where Nolan's body was ultimately found. Because according to Crump, it was recovered near the same general location where Nolan was last seen alive. Given the tides, the currents, the days that passed in between, that's not a small detail to gloss over. You've got low tides and high tides, Crump has said, laying out the basic problem in plain terms. So it's not adding up. We're not going to tell you what should have happened, tide-wise or current-wise, because we're not oceanographers and neither is the internet. What we can tell you is that people whose entire job is understanding ocean movement are being paid to look at this specific question, because on its face, the location doesn't obviously match the timeline everyone's been given. And that's really what ties all 5 of these gaps together, if you step back and look at them as a group instead of 5 separate stories. Each one, individually, could be explained away with a shrug. Phones get left places, Snapchats don't always get sent, boats really do take on water. Autopsies really are limited by decomposition and standard evidence retention practices. Currents really can be unpredictable. Any single one of these, on its own, is background noise. It's the fact that all 5 sit in the exact same case, around the exact same 18-year-old, all unresolved at the same time, that turns background noise into a pattern nobody's been able to explain yet. 5 gaps, all of them still open, none of them officially explained. What Christine found, and what she wouldn't let go of. Here's the part of this story that's easy to lose in the middle of 5 different threads of evidence. None of this started with a law firm. It started with a mother. Christine Wonsley didn't call an attorney first. She picked up her son's phone. She opened an app millions of parents already have installed and tracked where it had actually been. She went looking for the photos and videos she expected to find, because she knew her son, and she knew he documented everything, and when she didn't find them, she didn't talk herself out of what she was seeing. She kept asking why. Every single gap now sitting at the center of this investigation, the phone that ended up somewhere it shouldn't have, the Snapchat activity that vanished inside a window where it should have still existed, the recording that exists in 2 different versions with 2 different lengths, the autopsy that couldn't finish because of tissue that wasn't there, the timeline with a hole in it that experts are now calling material. Every one of those traces back to a woman who refused to stop asking questions about her son. So, where does that leave things right now? The family's attorney has said publicly that he expects this case could go in front of a grand jury within about 30 days. That's his estimate, based on the evidence timeline he's seen, not a scheduled date. The full CITO recording is still being analyzed by independent audio engineers, separate from the shorter clips that have already circulated. A joint forensic examination of the cell phones connected to this case, one that would likely involve the FBI, has been discussed but hasn't happened yet. And just this month, the Congressional Black Caucus sent a formal letter to the Attorney General and the FBI Director, asking the Department of Justice to determine whether a federal civil rights investigation is warranted, and giving the department 7 days to respond with what action it's taking. Local officials have been clear about one thing: presenting a case to a grand jury is standard procedure for any unnatural or suspicious death in that county, and it doesn't, by itself, mean anyone committed a crime. That's true, and it matters. Nobody has been charged with anything at this point, and nothing in these 5 gaps is proof of what happened to Nolan Wells. What they are is exactly what the title says: gaps. Places where the story doesn't match the evidence, and where the people responsible for explaining that gap haven't yet done so. And that distinction matters more than it might seem. A gap isn't a verdict. It's a question mark sitting where an answer should be. Some of these 5 will probably get closed in the coming weeks. The audio review will finish. The state's medical examiner's office will eventually release its own findings. The joint phone examination may or may not happen. Some might close with a mundane explanation. Others might not close at all, not in a way that satisfies anyone. That's the nature of an active investigation. It moves slower than the internet wants it to, and it rarely wraps up as neatly as a headline promises. One more thing, and it matters more than almost anything else in this video. None of this is an invitation to go find individual people online and decide for yourself what they did. That's already happened in this case. People connected to it, including a witness and even a judge, have been doxxed and threatened, badly enough that federal charges have already been filed against multiple people over it. That's not justice. That's just more damage, layered on top of a family that's already lost everything they had. The accountability being asked for here is aimed at institutions, investigators, medical examiners, the agencies that are supposed to explain what happened. It was never aimed at strangers on the internet deciding they've solved it. If you want to keep up with where this case goes from here, because it is not over, it is accelerating, go ahead and subscribe, and we'll keep bringing you the verified updates as they come, gap by gap, fact by fact. Before you go, a full note on everything you just heard. This video is based on public reporting from national and local news outlets, court and investigative filings referenced by those outlets, and public statements made by Nolan Wells' family and their legal representatives. The investigation into Nolan Wells' death is active and ongoing. No individual has been charged with any crime in connection with his death. Statements from friends, family, and attorneys represent their own accounts and claims, not proven facts. Cause and manner of death remain officially undetermined. This video does not accuse any named or unnamed individual of criminal conduct, and nothing in it should be treated as a conclusion about what happened to Nolan Wells. We'll continue to update this story as verified information becomes available.